So hi Parag, lovely to have you on this session. And let me start with a very brief introduction. So my name is Gopa Kumar, and I joined the VC industry. I joined TDICI, as ICICI Venture was earlier known, in 1991, and I was there for 5.5 years. And 2 years later, uh, Parag Dhol, who's now a general partner with Inventus, he joined uh, fresh out of IIM Bangalore. Uh, Over the last close to 30 years that Parag and I have known each other, we have met reasonably often. We've chatted. We share views on a few things and don't share views on many things. So we have I've had a number of years of knowing Parag, but among everything else, the one thing that has struck me most about Parag is really how he approaches the the whole idea of investing. Um, and therefore, as we start this sort of series, which I hope will build up to be a repository of wonderful knowledge, it is my privilege to have Paragin and for him to share uh, perhaps in the essence of his investing journey um, over what is now going to be maybe 27 years, Parag, thereabouts.
Something like that.
Yeah. But you don't look it. That much I can tell you.
My hair shows it.
Okay.
Or the lack of it.
Yeah. So between Parag and myself, we have both gray and lack. Okay. So we sort of cover the universe of growing older. Briefly going to just talk about inventors and about Parag's fund. Just give me a minute to load this in. Yes. So um, he's been with inventors for one of the founders, been with of the India operations, been with inventors for about 12 years. He's a general partner. There's a lovely team here which got lots of IITs, lots of IIMBs in it, right? So I'm not complaining because I'm from IMB myself. And what what you can see here is that they have a portfolio that is actually spread across four categories. Uh, the India consumer tech that seems to carry Parag more businesses than the other three categories in terms of numbers. But I'm sure you've sort of hedged your bets with some very interesting investments in enterprise software global, deep tech, and the B2B enterprise software business. Some very well-known names here. So I don't need to go about it in great detail. You can see it, and sort of these are names. Many of them are known to people who are watching this. Um, Being a bunch of MBAs, we all like to put things into x-axis and y-axis. So there we are. So they've put their businesses into various categories. Again, that's very well rounded. So there's one category which is seed stage and B2C, or seed stage B2B. You can see that there's a whole bunch of Series A investments. So Parag, typically Inventus comes in pretty early on, is what we can understand by looking at those number of investments on the right side of the y-axis. Um, and they have invested into hardware and Internet of Things and so on and so forth, right? So this is just a very quick sort of understanding of what Inventus is all about, right? And of course, this is what they are truly very proud about. Good show. And I'm going to sort of ask Parag as we get started in this. So this has been 12 years being part of this team, leading, what is investing. So could you summarize this? Have you, if you had the opportunity to do this all over again, would you do things any differently? What do you think?
So, venture capital suits my temperament, Gopa. It is very, very long term. It is relationship building over a period of time. I, by nature, am not a very outgoing person, so it involves a lot of thinking. It involves a lot of reading. It involves what Kahneman would call type two thinking. A lot of type two thinking. So,
Wow.
or system two thinking. So that way, I think it suits me well. And the firm that we have built somehow, the value systems in terms of, let us say, something as basic as focus on capital efficiency in an environment where capital doesn't seem to have a cost, isn't it? So so that belief that all of us have is ultimately capital has a cost, and hence you have to be efficient in the utilization of it. So those basic value systems across the three of us, and hopefully the two younger people that we have brought on, that is there, and keeps one going in some senses. Second, I guess, I mean, 30 years in something is a lot of, about 30 years is a lot of time to give to something. But the good thing is every 15 days, every 30 days, an entrepreneur turns up and blows a mind, isn't it? So he either is so exceptionally smart or has such a deep insight into something that you really feel energized and want to go back to office the next day for that reason. And it is those experiences that are possible in this world, besides the fact that you get to live with companies for a long time, that I have found attractive.
Wow, wow. So for those of you who were wondering what was that author's name that Parag threw in between, Daniel Kahneman, um, Thinking Fast and Slow. And I'm so delighted that you brought that up because Thinking Fast and Slow is one of my favorite all-time books. I'll read it when I get time sometime, right? Sorry, I'm just kidding. But do read it. It's a beautiful book. If you don't have the time to actually read it, do watch videos of Kahneman because he is a delight and he sort of reinvented the way we look at so many things, isn't it, Parag? Yeah. The second thing that strikes me as you were speaking is the fact that you're using the phrase capital allocation. Most people who generally use the phrase capital allocation don't come from a VC background. Most of them typically come from a very different investing background, which is the Warren Buffett style of investing. And once again, I'm so delighted to hear you use the phrase capital allocation and capital efficiency.
Mm.
Wonderful to have you say that. Um, and what I'm going to do is how we decided to divide this little presentation up is to ask Parag a bunch of questions. And I shared these questions with him, partly because I didn't want to embarrass myself, honestly. Yeah, and I thought it's good to have because I do have the habit of asking extraordinarily stupid questions. So Parag actually replied saying, "Gopa, it's okay." I mean, he didn't. He was very polite enough not to be particularly rude about the questions I had asked, but he said, "I will answer those." So can we get started, Parag?
Yes, please go
Yes,
ahead.
and then the first question I have is pretty much up here. I mean, yeah, 27 years to be precise. And what are the top lessons? I mean, would you be able to summarize this in 2.7 minutes? And yeah,
That's a tough call, but
just
uh,
kidding, just kidding. Yeah.
now see, I think one of the things is that pedigree matters, and I don't only mean in terms of those ITIMs or whatever. I think the companies that you work for, the company that you keep, as distinct from, let's say, Delhi, is the car that you keep. It is that thing that matters in the long run, is what we have found. That basic cliche in venture capital, which goes that a B team cannot make a success out of an A plan, but an A team can still make out a success out of a B plan, absolutely applies. So that is one thing that we have learned over and over again. At times we have over focused on some initial revenues as typical Series A investors. We look at 5, 10, 15 lakhs of revenues a month. We have focused on those revenues and compromised on let us say the characteristics of the team, and we have failed in all of those situations. So I think pedigree matters is the first thing that I
Wow.
would say. Second, I would say, is when you find something good, double down. When you believe in it, irrespective of whether others believe in it or not, at least for a specific period of time. So to that extent, I give myself 3 years. If there is dissonance between me and somebody, me and the larger market for 3 years, I'm willing to live with it. And if you see something good in an entrepreneur, policy bazaar, a red bus, etc., we have a company called Play Shifu where we are actually doing that, where people don't seem to have the faith that we do. So to that extent, if you do that, you get extraordinary returns. That's the only way to get extraordinary returns when you disagree with people, and rightly so. You can be a contrarian, but you have to be right as well. So I think doubling down is very, very important to generating returns. And third thing, I think, and this I learned uh, in life in general, but don't try to be someone else. I think the VC market has a lot of herd followers, has a lot of, let us say, people, flavor of the month kind of
Hmm.
investing, and they're putting in tremendous amount of capital into very early stage companies. But some of the belief systems, if they are different for the market as a whole, even for extended period of times, stay your course, because you can only win your own game. It's like running against yourself against versus running against the crowd. So that is exceptionally important, I would say. On your question about exits, disinvesting, I think the truth is that in a market like India, very few exit opportunities come along. So take every one of them that come along seriously,
Hmm.
because they won't come at a significant frequency. This is not the US.
Wow.
This is still not the US for
Wow.
sure.
Hmm.
So to that extent, I think, and in we have learned to our chagrin that that when you pass up on opportunities, we convinced one particular set of entrepreneurs not to sell their company, even though it was in a high obsolescence kind of a segment, because they were doing very well then, but then it turned on us. So be very clear that exit opportunities are few and far between, and when obsolescence cycles are very high, do not ride that high thing and keep on waiting for
Hmm.
it to grow further. Take a chance and exit. On partnering, I think in a few instances, maybe the negative side, but choose your co-investors well, because I've been in situations where managing the co-investors became more of a time sink than interacting with the company. So,
That's right.
that is important, especially at an early stage. And some of the private equity types, and I should say that with due respect, there are exceptions to every rule, but some of them think differently than us in terms of having the cycles, patience,
That's right.
etc., etc. So, to that extent, choose your co-investors very, very well.
Fantastic. I mean, this is really, I am evolving from being a friend, Parag, to being a fan, right? And it strikes me that there are two, three elements of the human being that you're bringing out truly, and one is patience. The other one is, because you mentioned contrarian, I'm also talking about courage, a certain amount of courage in your conviction, courage in yourself, courage in the person you've invested in or the team you've invested in. Fantastic, I think. And the third is not trying to be somebody else, just being very comfortable with who you are and the kind of person you're sort of built to be. Some
Hmm.
people are sort of probably built to be on the roller coaster. I've never known you to be built to ride a roller coaster. If you do that, you probably do that outside your VC business when you're visiting Disney or something like that, but certainly not between 9 and 5 on a weekday, right? So
Mm,
that's very, very perceptive. Thank you very much, right?
Gopa.
Okay. And if we sort of move on and look at, you talked about the entrepreneur, and you really said that's a pedigree, the what a pedigree, or the fact that these guys are, these are the folks you really want to back. I mean, this question is incomplete. I sort of, there's a dot 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 at the end. So how do you assess an entrepreneur, not just in two aspects? I'm saying, how do you really look for the person you want to back?
Mm. See, I think Gopa, as I like to think, as I grow older, I grow softer, in the sense that
Okay.
not softer in the sense of, I mean, economically softer or economic thinking
Yes.
softer, but
Yes.
in terms of the soft things about a person being far more important. Capability is easy to judge, isn't it? I mean, he or she, you're interacting with 6 7 meetings, you speak with people, due diligence will get you a lot of it. So those things are easier, but I think it is that motivation question. What drives you? What purpose? Is it money? Is it short term? Why did you start this in the first place? Do you have, see, the entrepreneurship journey is going to be difficult. It is long. There'll be more downs than ups. All of us know that
That's
from
right.
experience. So you want to make sure that it is a bunch of people who have worked together or have lived together in a college or whatever environment, so that they can trust each other, they can go through those ups
Yes.
and downs without looking over each other's shoulders, etc., etc. Plus the fact that this takes very long, and at times it requires you to postpone your dreams, so that you look for the bigger picture down the road rather than instant gratification, delayed gratification, if you will. So you look for signs of that. For example, if you went to good colleges, and I'm kind of contradicting what I said earlier, but you worked hard to get there, isn't it?
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
You run. That is
Hmm.
a extremely difficult thing to do in the first place. You have to push yourself when your body is not yeah, you're fit, or whatever. Or I've come across somebody who's very much into classical music, Indian classical music, and Indian classical music is probably the only form anywhere in the world where people seek perfection, isn't it? Otherwise, just optimality will do.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
you look for those quantities, those qualities now, so to speak, rather than the quantifiable things.
Hmm.
When you look at a thing like motivation, purpose, etc., etc. So passion and persistence, in my mind, are the two things that you are genuinely looking for in a person, and those are the ones I think are, in my mind, very closely correlated to success.
Yeah.
There are many other factors, but passion and persistence are, in my mind,
Hmm.
consistent across any successful person, I would say.
Fabulous. Okay. So you also, in capability assessment, you really talked about due diligence as something that brings it out.
Mm.
In motivation, you really talked about, what's essentially, how do I figure it out? Conversations, trying to understand why is the person doing this? Is the person genuinely passionate about something? Is he being driven by passion, he or she? Um, and is the person willing to run the course? Is the person willing to stay 3 years, 5 years, whatever time it takes to make this happen, right?
Mm.
Two sort of comments that come to mind are, one is, I was marveling when uh, I read about the Happiest Minds IPO, because here was a gentleman who's in his 70s, who's doing his sort of second startup, but really he's even in within Wipro. Mr. Suta was very much an entrepreneur within a larger company. So a remarkable example of somebody who could have sat back, put his feet up, and quite comfortably lived the rest of his life, but saying, no, no, I need to do this all over again. Right? I wonder if that thought crossed your mind when you came across Happiest Minds as well. Quite
I
a,
know some of the investors there, and Ashok Sudha is an extraordinary person. I think there are very few people who can drive themselves for that long
that's right.
at that tempo, and that's
At
just
that
amazing.
tempo.
Mm.
Absolutely.
That's
And
just amazing.
I remember Mr. Narayan Murthy used to talk about management teams. When you talked about teams and trust, and have they sort of been in the same college or the same hostel together, he used to talk about teams that are mutually exclusive and collectively exhaustive.
Mm.
Right? Now, that
That's a good
again
way
is
of
a
putting
sort of very ideal phenomenon, but I'm sure
it.
somewhere when you look at a team of two or three or four, you're sort of assessing whether they complement each other in some sense. I guess I'm broadly there. Yeah,
No, absolutely, Gopal. The only qualification I would put there is, see, we are very early stage investors. There are two,
that's
three
right.
people. This is not an Infosys type of a company. 6, 7 very high quality people coming together, maybe more
That's
in
right.
Infosys
That's
case.
right.
So you are not looking for completeness, I would say, but you are still looking for, and all three of them might be engineers. So to that extent,
Yeah,
diversity might not be there. But I think what you're looking for is, can one of them be a sales guy? Can one of them
that's right.
tell a story? Is
That's right.
very good? Is one of them very good at technology? Okay, or somebody else very good at product? So that orientation more than the past skill is what you're looking for
Fantastic.
in these guys, because we are typically investing at an early stage in fairly young founders.
That's right.
So you are projecting the future, which is even harder to do.
Yes, yes, yes. Yeah, like somebody said, it's particularly difficult, especially when you have to project the future, right? Or predict the future. It's like, yeah, good point. Thank you. So because it's early stage, it's a lot more challenging to do. But broadly, that's what you would look for, at least those key skills in technology and marketing, for example. Would you be able to tell a story, right? And I love the fact that you again talk about telling a story, because I've always believed in the power of storytelling. Many of my friends often tend to think that I overdo it, but that's a different story. It's- let's let's move on to look at the third question that I wanted to ask you. You know, and this is so relevant for today, right? And rather than read it out, I would just like you to take off from this whole business of divergence in valuations and carry on.
So, Gopa, see, our perspective is slightly different. And again, because we are at an early stage. See, honestly, we play in the band of $4 to $10 million of valuation, isn't it? So, if you look at the range that we have, it would be that much. Whether we would have paid 4 in Redbus or 7 in Redbus or 10 in Redbus wouldn't have made a difference, honestly.
Okay. Yeah.
So at our stage, I think Buffett's words that you'd rather be approximately right than precisely wrong is applies beautifully, isn't it? So
Okay.
DCFs, PE, etc. I mean, go out of the window. You're basically judging thumb ruleish. Okay, this seems like a good team. 5 million is the median, maybe for a good team and an attractive market, I'll pay 7. So it is as thumb ruleish as that at our stage.
Wow.
At as the company matures, it becomes more of a science. It never becomes a perfect science. Valuation never becomes a perfect science. But so I don't spend a whole lot of time thinking about who paid what for Ola or Cred, etc., etc. Those are fine. Those are investors who know what they are doing. They operate at a different scale. At times, they have 2 more zeros than we have in our checks, etc., etc. So let them think about those problems. For us, being directionally right is most important, and that is best done in an uncertain scenario through thumb rules. The moment you get into I don't know whether you have heard of a concept called Occam's razor, which argues that two approaches, two methodologies to solve a problem. The one which has lesser assumptions is better off. So to that extent, we always go with the one with lesser assumptions, which turns out to be very thumb ruleish.
Fantastic. Could you tell us a little more about the eraser? A little bit. I mean, what is the context in which this thumb rule came into being?
No, so Occam's razor says that, let us say, the principle says that there are two models that you have for the world, or for that matter, credit rating or whatever. The one that has lower number of assumptions, let's say a DCF versus PE. DCF has too many assumptions, isn't it? So
That's right.
PE in that scenario is better than DCF because it has far lesser assumptions. Whereas when a
Yes.
company is let's say very mature, let us say a Hindustan Lever kind of a thing, then in a DCF the assumptions go away, isn't it? They
That's
become
right.
reality. So to speak.
Fantastic.
So you can
Yes.
you can still apply DCF there, but at an earlier stage, a PE, price to sales, thumb rules work. Is the point.
Yes. Yes. Okay. That really answered my question. My only sort of comment is, I honestly wonder when I think about the last time any fund manager possibly applied a DCF on Hindustan Unilever, right? It must have been somewhere between 1945 and 1947, right? So just kidding. But let's move on to, thank you. So the summary of what you're saying is, you don't spend a bucket load of time on thinking on valuations, and you would rather use a thumb rule, which sort of assesses what are the assumptions we are making principally, and the lesser the assumptions, the better. And then you would sort of apply some sort of thumb rule on coming up with the valuation numbers. But it's not something that's going to get you sleepless nights, right? And part of the reason I'm asking you that this question is because I've been out of VC for many, many years. I've been out of private equity for a little lesser than that. But what I have seen is what I read in the newspapers, and a lot of it seems to be completely disconnected from everything that I thought had any semblance to reality. And perhaps I will be proved spectacularly wrong, or unfortunately spectacularly right, right? But time will tell. So that was the reason I asked you the question.
Yeah.
Um, Sorry, you have a comment?
No, no, go ahead.
Okay, okay. So much for this, and let's sort of um, key question: how do we really value a company? Yeah, this was hard coded in earlier. Otherwise, I would have removed this question. You've sort of answered this question, unless you want to add anything to it that you may have missed.
So the only thing that I would mention, Gopa, is I think one of the biggest disservices that an IIM or equity research does to you is this concept of relative valuations. Okay, uh, that in my mind is completely bunkum. I mean, going back to the days, and we didn't know then that Satyam was turned out to be a chore company, but I always said one rupee of EPS of Satyam is never equivalent to 1 rupee of EPS of Infosys. Everybody knew that because there was
Yes,
suspicion about Satyam in any case.
yes,
So that's why this relative valuation concept, move out of it, is what I have always believed in. I do a bit of stock market investing, and I think the absolute basis valuations, simple ones again, PE to growth, etc.
mm,
If you look at those kind of things which measure the valuation in absolute terms to the company, the growth of the company, the earnings potential of the company, that is the best way to go in my mind. Especially in companies that are slightly more mature. In our case, in any case, as I said, these companies do not have barely any revenues, 5, 10, 15 lakhs of revenues, obviously are losing a lot of money. So there's no question about DCF. It's just silly, isn't it? So
that's
even
right.
a PE at times becomes a very difficult one because
That's right.
you are, these people are trying to target markets which didn't exist before. So
That's right.
it's an art at our stage. Yeah, it is not
Right.
science.
Right. And I guess it's also probably conversations you have with your colleagues. I mean, is it therefore when on an issue like this, which is an art and where you can't really place, you can't put your thumb on something, you can't work it out on a piece of paper. Having conversations with Samir and your colleagues, does that really add value to the whole thing? Are
So
two heads better than one in such an instance of valuation?
no, absolutely, Gopa. In almost every aspect of VC life, I think partnership, that's why they exist as partnerships. I think some of us are more conservative than the others. We have different views, different outlook to life, different experiences, etc., etc. And we bring all that to the table. So some of
Mhm.
us are much more conservative in valuation than the others. So it is a discussion. And that becomes, yes, is it a very scientific discussion? At times no, simply because it is more as I said, it is more an art, but there has to be consensus, and I think you stop yourself from being stupid by having some checks and balances, and partnership is a good way of
Right.
doing that.
Right. So a question that I hadn't really scheduled, but really want to ask you this: um, as a partner in a fund, uh, does your does your need to say no, or I'm sorry, let me rephrase that. Does your ability to say no to a colleague really matter? For example, if I was your partner and I put a proposal down on the table, if I was a GP at Inventors, let us say, and you really think that, Gopa's pushing this, but I really don't think it's a great idea. Um, does assertiveness really matter? It just, and sorry if this was sprung on you unannounced, but it just
No, no,
occurred to
that's
me,
fine.
when we work in teams, this is an important question. Yeah.
No, that is fine. I think that's a very fair question and a very pertinent one. So I think this is one of the things that Kanwal contributed to the partnership in particular. I think one of the ground rules that we started off with was that there's no deal worth breaking the partnership for. Okay.
Wow, wow. Repeat
So
that. I think I want you to repeat that. That's so important. Please
there
repeat.
is no deal worth breaking the partnership for. Okay, so that is that we I think while we have now restructured and they have gone their own way from three onwards, but that is one thing that is a life lesson in some senses. So it has to be consensus, it has to be built up. Yes, if it becomes an environment where you said no to my last deal, so I'll say no to this one, then you are in a bad place. You are not in a partnership. You are then working in a big company, isn't it? The definition of a big company, as somebody said, people don't work hard, people don't work together. So, so
Okay. Yeah.
the second one is very important. That's why partnerships exist. And if you have a ground rule like that, like we did, I think that saved lot of these issues that we talked about, you talk about, which come up particularly in larger partnerships. The smaller partnerships is easier to manage
Right.
because you know each other much better.
Right. So it's the ability to say no. It's also the ability to take a no and not to make it not to take it personally. I think that these are two important points. So I had asked you a question on the first. You've not only answered that, you've added a second comment as well. And for those of you who are fairly new to the whole business of venture capital, Parag mentioned Kanwal in between. Parag, a sentence or two about Kanwal. I know, of course, about him, but coming from you, it would be special.
So Kanwal was one of the
Full
first
name, please.
entrepreneurs.
Kanwal Rekhi. Yes,
Kanwal
thank you.
Rekhi was one of the first entrepreneurs, Indian American entrepreneurs, to take his company public. Exelan, it was called. It was in the early days of TCP/IP. He took the on the American stock exchanges. So he has that distinction. This was way back in the late 80s, and then merged
Wow.
his company with Novell and went on to become an angel investor and then founded
Yes,
Inventors. So that's who he is.
yes. And when I was in VC in the mid '90s, Kanwal Rekhi was considered a legend, right? And there were what was fascinating then and continues to today is there was this early crop of VC legends, and you had a whole bunch of Indians, which is not something that anyone is surprised with, but it was fascinating, and all of them were people typically who had gone through the IIT, NIT kind of system, gone to the US, Parag, to do their masters,
Mm.
doctorate, and so on, set up a bunch of tech companies in the valley, and then had turned VCs. And as far back as the late 80s, early 90s, these folks were considered to be legends, right? So there we are. Um, and let's sort of move on and ask Parag the next question, which is any failure lessons you would like to share? Not so much which company failed, but more what were the lessons that you sort of took away um, from the experience, right?
Failure is obviously an inevitable part of this business, and that's where you learn the most, isn't it? So, in
Yes.
one particular company, for example, he's probably one of the brightest guys we have back. Okay, he works in currently works in one of the top technology companies in the world, and he's worth every dollar that he earns there, so to speak. He's that bright, but he couldn't make up his mind between two streams. He had two products, and
Right.
we kept on arguing that you can't, as a early stage company, you have to choose between one of them. And I think that ultimately ended up being the reason for his downfall, so to speak. So that was a that was lesson worth learning. I've talked about backing.
Sorry, can I interrupt you there?
Yes,
I
please go
didn't
ahead.
quite understand the lesson. So that's that's a business decision that went awry.
Mm, mm.
Uh, so what was it? You mean what was the lesson there that you
Okay.
took away?
Okay, so Gopa, and maybe that is, I didn't give the context, but the point is that we are firm believers. One of the firm beliefs, besides let's say capital efficiency, is that an early stage company has to focus on one thing for it to be a success, isn't it?
Has to
Uh,
focus on one thing.
Yes. If
Okay.
you're trying to let us say ride two wild horses at the same time, I mean, it's at that early stage. It is that is the analogy, isn't it? You can't be
Yes,
riding two wild horses. One of them is hard enough to do.
that's
So
right.
that's the context, and that's what I meant. That both of them were somewhat different product lines. Yes, there were connections between the two in terms of at an abstract level, but at a tactical customer that you go after, the segment that you go after, those were two different things. So he just couldn't make up his mind between one and the other. It was a small investment, honestly, so we didn't lose a lot of money. So there is no this thing. But the point that I'm trying to make is, even with very high IQ guys, this inability to take some of these strategic calls could get a company into
Mm,
trouble. That's
fantastic, fabulous. And therefore, the lesson, the lesson I'm taking away is uh, focus,
mm,
right? And if I may just take a quick pause from asking you questions to tell you this lovely YouTube video that I had seen where um, there was a interesting experiment that Bill Gates' father did. And as most of you probably know, Warren Buffett and Bill Gates are good friends. And Bill Gates' father took a chit of paper, two chits, and gave one each to both of them and asked them to put down the one word that would define their sort of working philosophy. And what was fascinating was both of them, without any communication with each other, wrote focus on it. Right? So I can tell you that Inventus is in fairly privileged company, right?
if we become
Okay.
1/10 of who they are, and I don't mean it in the monetary way, I think those people are
Yeah.
extraordinary people by themselves. They are.
Yes. So what is fascinating is we are, though we are really talking about VC, early stage, we're sort of cross-referencing with people who are from very different sort of lines of businesses and very different stages of their investment life cycle, right? But fascinating, Parag. I'm thoroughly enjoying it, and I hope you're finding it interesting as well. Right?
Mm,
So we talked about the failure lesson, which was probably in that one instance where the entrepreneur wasn't necessarily able to focus, was caught in indecision. Parag mentioned this bit about a man with an extraordinary IQ unable to do that. And I would like to add that perhaps some sort of emotional belonging to both these ideas may have meant not just an IQ that was involved, but an emotional quotient as well. Possibly, it is just my reading into this, but I could be wrong, Parag.
no. There was a definitely with one of the products there was a long emotional attachment. Yes,
Yeah.
you're right.
So when this happens all the time, and asking an entrepreneur to drop something that is his or her baby, but is not doing too well, doesn't
Mm.
make too much sense in the future. Um, Asking an entrepreneur to do that is not necessarily a very easy job to do,
No,
and
no.
somewhere
So,
along the
Gopa,
line,
I don't ask entrepreneurs to do things. I think I'm past that stage. They have to make up their minds. You can only give pointers. You can just say that this is the business lesson that you've learned, isn't it? I even gave him the choice of which product you want to go after. Even though I wanted, in my heart of hearts, I wanted him to choose product two or product one,
right?
but I gave him the choice. So that is not my thing was choose because doing both is the path to disaster. That's where it
Right.
ended. So
Right, right. Perfect. Thank you. Thank you for raising that and clarifying it. Fantastic point, right? Um, okay. We talked about Candyman, Daniel Candyman, and we sort of very interestingly come back to Candyman again. For those of you who again are fascinated by behavioral economics, you have to, and just to make sure that you didn't miss what I just said, you have to. Okay, go through this paper that Kahneman and Tversky have written on biases and heuristics, which is how do we really take decisions. And a big part of VC is taking decisions at multiple points in time, not just where you invest, right? But also where, at, during the course of partnering the entity, and when you finally disinvest, having other partners come in and so on. So my question to Parag really is, uh, are you really, having read Kahneman, have you seen biases in yourself? Have you seen biases in teams you've worked with? How will I'm sort of hoping that when you speak about these biases, um, many people watching this will learn and see themselves in these situations. For example, a company that's got words like AI in it or that throws jargon tends to create certain favorable biases in many people, not in Parag necessarily, but in many people. Yes, yes, Parag, let's hear you.
No, so the biases are inherent in all of us. I talked about storytelling, for example. Some people are good at storytelling, but I think the success comes with people who marry storytelling with execution skills, isn't it? So that Venn
Yes.
intersection diagram. So at times you overthink the storytelling bit, and he or she is very good at storytelling, and you end up in the wrong place simply because you got bedazzled or whatever. So I think that happens quite often in a
Even today,
particular. Sorry.
even today, it happens even today.
No, I think that is a inherent bias in human beings, Gopa. It is just not possible to completely. A bias by definition means that you will never probably ever completely remove it. You can
That's right.
just train yourself to reduce it. So
That's right.
that's I think that has to be said. The second one, for example, we had a company which sold off part of its business, and uh, that business was not going very well, even though it had taken in a lot of capital. We could have shut the company down at that time and not invested in a second product and hoped for the best, so to speak. But we hoped for a pivot, and that hope didn't work out. So
Mm.
now we are making zero instead of making at least $5 million. So
Wow.
that loss aversion bias, and that it had multiple shareholders, so I shouldn't beat myself up entirely, but nevertheless, it is that loss aversion bias, for example, shows up, so to speak, there. Various other kind of biases at various points in time. You get married to an idea, married to a person, you keep on investing in the person. You have seen that at TDSI, isn't it? So
Who said it?
even exceptionally bright people who were there made that mistake over and over again, isn't it? In people who it was obvious to everybody but to that exceptionally intelligent person that this was not the guy to back, isn't it? So those kind of getting married to things, and that's why partnerships exist, I think, to remove some of those biases. But for us, I think,
Fabulous.
because of our nature, and you alluded to that, these FOMO biases, the fear of missing out bias,
Mm.
that one doesn't exist too much, because we don't suffer from it in the first place, most of us. I don't at all. I'm a born contrarian, so I just hope to be right. So I don't suffer from it at all, and my partners also are more like me than the general trend in the VC market.
Mm. Oh, fabulous. Okay, so the last one was probably one that I had kept for later, but it's very interesting. The fear of missing out, which is something that we see all around us. We see it in the way mutual funds look at investments, even in a market like today, as we speak, on the 6th of Jan. Um, the stock exchanges have taken leave of their senses. Actually, not Sensex, I mean senses. They took leave of their senses quite a while ago, and it continues to do so. So it's something that has just been going on and on and on, right? We also, I would also like to add to one little piece to Parag's bit about the loss aversion bias, which is closely linked to another bias that, again, Kahneman and Tversky have studied, which is called the sunk cost bias, right? Which is, I have invested $1 million in a company, it's not going anywhere, but I see an opportunity to redeem something if I put in another million or two. And what am I trying to do here? I'm trying to really jump into a whirlpool when I should really be walking out. Other things should be giving me alarm signals, but I ignore those because I'm trying to protect my first 1 million. Broadly on track, Parag? Is that example broadly on track?
No, absolutely. It was a sunk cost problem. I think you have to think marginally in those situations instead of thinking
Absolutely.
average. So
Absolutely.
but all this is very easy to say, very hard to do.
Yes. 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 So what Parag, if I may just summarize one important point you're making here is most people who are aspiring for a career in venture capital typically have gone through an education background that is an MBA, that's a chartered accountancy, or some form of a business background, or have many years in business, right? And many of these terms are second nature to them. They have understood these terms, they have seen this, but when push comes to shove, and like you said, when you are at that moment taking a decision, um, being cognizant of being under the influence of a bias isn't very easy, right? At that moment, to tell yourself that I am suffering from a loss aversion bias is not very easy. So people don't speak to themselves often enough. In fact, the power of Excel actually destroys that, because uh, and on an Excel spreadsheet you can create any IRR you want, right? And that sort of damages this ability to look inwards at yourself.
No, as usual, says it beautifully, isn't it? You are not right or wrong because people agree with you, but because your facts are right or wrong. So
Because your
focus on
facts
the
are right.
facts. Focus
Yes.
on the facts. I have never felt very badly about disagreeing with 15 other very smart people in the room. That has never
Mhm.
bothered me. But that's not. I mean, I shouldn't beat my own drum. I still have to be proven right. As I said, you have
Yes.
to be a contrarian, but you have to be proven right as well. I still haven't gotten there, so to speak.
Yes. Yes.
So I'm that's not where I'm going.
Perfect.
All I'm trying to say is you have to have the ability to sit back and say no. What supporting Trump at this point in time as a Republican is against the Constitution, isn't it? So,
Absolutely.
how many people can do that? How
Do
many
that.
politicians can do that? And we are seeing that, isn't it? In every field of
Absolutely.
life that applies.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you very much. I think that's a very good point. And let's come to, we're closing up, and we have just probably a question or two. And this was a generic question to somebody who's in venture capital. So I looked at his presentation. I saw many of these are sort of, especially stuff that is in deep tech and so on. So I wanted Parag's view on first mover advantage. Over to you, Parag.
Success, Gopa, is a function of many factors. Function X1, X2, X3, X4, and first mover advantage is one of those. So to that extent, I think it works at times. Doesn't work. For example, in current times, it is the guy who the prevailing wisdom seems to be the guy who can raise the maximum amount of money, is the best storyteller, etc., tends to win, isn't it?
That's
So
right.
that has nothing to do with whether the guy started first or. But there are certain people who can match that thing starting up early. Let me give you an example. Redbus versus, there was a much more experienced team than the Redbus guys called Ticketwala. Okay. Uh,
Hmm. Hmm.
but the approaches to the market, they were both attacking the bus market, but Ticketwala decided that they would automate the bus operators first and then sell tickets. On the other hand, Redbus, advised by Sanjay Anandram, who you know very well at an early stage, took the right call in terms of let us sell more tickets, because the bus operators are looking at us to sell more tickets. They are not looking at us to kind of software ERP them, so to speak. they would be interested if we increase their sales. They took the right call. They focused
Wow.
at this end of the spectrum. So a younger bunch of guys with lesser business experience ended up winning because they focused on the right side. Both of them started approximately at the right time. Maybe Redbus started a few months earlier. So to that extent, just the approach to a market could determine this, and it could have easily been the other way around, in the sense that if they
Yes.
had the horse sense, they would have done it. So time, yes, first mover matters. Somebody. I would be surprised if somebody other than Redbus or Ticketwala made it, but between those two, very close to each other, it is this approach to the market, the smarter decisions, which make a difference.
Okay. Thank you so much. Right. And as we close this, let me ask you a sort of final question. Um, Somebody wants to sort of, may not be an immediate goal, but somebody has this dream, this long-term goal of becoming a venture capitalist. Somebody believes that that's where I want to be, that's my career, right? And wants to prepare for it, wants to really prepare for it, right? What sort of reading, what sort of education or learning? When I say education, I don't necessarily mean MBA, etc., etc. I'm referring to life education, right? So, what sort of reading, learning, education would you really ask this person to subscribe to?
So, Gopa, and I think this is one lesson that when I look at myself, when I went to do an MBA there, I think at IIM where you went to, I realized that one of the mistakes I made was siloing myself. I have to do very well in finance courses, and I didn't learn as much about marketing. I genuinely believe, Kotler, you should know every page, for example. Okay, that is important, and I didn't do that because of the orientation. So I think what I'm trying to say is make yourself as close to a polymath as possible. Polymaths are rare. Polymaths are very exceptionally intelligent people, but that should be your goal, to know a lot of very many things rather than go deep. It's like, I think a good VC, the way I describe it, is somebody who's a good student of business. I didn't know this again when I went to IIM, but but that is what an MBA is, isn't it? So, and that comes from breadth, and that can only come from breadth. So read widely, read Kahneman at one end, and read obviously everything about technology and Buffett and everybody else who's thought about business. So it shouldn't be a narrow, I'm focused on only the blogs of the top VCs in the US or in India or Twitter feeds, whatever the case may be. Be broader in your thought. This is a you link, therefore you are kind of a business, and we
Fantastic.
don't recruit very often. So to that extent, I mean, we as an industry is what I mean. So to that extent, you should know that it takes time to get into it. So give yourself time if you really want to,
Mhm.
and test yourself if you are that kind of a person. See, some of us, I have a friend from Miami, for example, who's a born sales guy. He's I mean, natural sales guy. Okay, their cycles of feedback loops, if you will, are much shorter. 2 months, 3 months, they get a bonus, they get a kick from the $1 million deal, etc., etc. If you are
Right.
that type, don't come into VC. If you fundamentally, because this is a very long-term business. For 5 years, you will not even know. And while we were at TDICI, we used to have these discussions. But if you are not the type who can survive for 5 years, and not understand whether you are a success or not, then don't get into this business, because this is a very long-term business, and it is ruthless in the sense that the exit barriers are very high. You're left with no skills at the end of the day, no functional
That's right.
skills. So you can't do anything else.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you had better know what you're doing. It looks sexy, like any other profession. It looks sexy from the outside. It has its mundane elements, it has its very exciting elements, like any other job, so to speak. So do not get excited by just what you see in the papers
Right.
and some of the VCs talking about. So, and leave the sex element. Sex appeal is the wrong way to go, so to speak.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So when Parag talked about exit barriers, he's primarily talking about people who might see at some point in their career, and I'm one of them, that VC is not something that I want to do. It's not what I'm cut out for. Now, when I chose to leave VC, it was to do something on my own. And for most people who leave VC, they tend to move in that direction, right? So but like Parag rightly said, it's not something that's very easy to do, because after many years of doing VC, you really aren't particularly skilled to go back to core tech or core marketing or whatever you wish to do, right? Um, and this has been a sparkling conversation, absolutely sparkling conversation. And, I was just looking at my watch, it's 7 p.m. I just don't know how, what, close to 45, 50 minutes passed by. Um, so just want to say more than anything else, thank you very much. What everybody would have seen of Parag is a very honest guy. I've been in the room with him, so I know that he's not afraid to say no to something. He speaks his mind, but also a very modest person, right? And I would love to end by saying that I just wish we can take those lessons away. I wish we can take and apply a lot of that, right? And see whether we build a sort of repository of knowledge on which we can take good. Need not necessarily be sensible, because you don't know how the future will hold for a business, but good decision making practices would be useful for us to take away. Thank you. Thanks a ton, Parag. Thank you so much.
This was good. I enjoyed it as well, Gopa.
Thank you. Right.